The dirt street of the small frontier town lay in silence, broken only by the hiss of the wind dragging dust between the wooden buildings. Above, heavy clouds dimmed the sun, casting the world in shades of gray and stretching long, uneasy shadows across the ground. In the center stood Abner Colt Harkins, his weathered hands gripping the reins of Thunder Hoof, the scarred chestnut horse that had carried him through fire and famine. The animal's breath came in rough bursts, steam in the cold air, his dark eyes wide with tension. Abner's face was stone, but his heartbeat thundered like a war drum in his chest. At the far end of the street, shapes began to form out of the dust. The first was Rustjaw Tate, his twisted jaw lit by the dull light, a rifle slung casually across his shoulder. Beside him stalked Crowfoot Mercer, calculating, his eyes black slits that weighed every breath Abner took. Behind them emerged more shadows, Rufus Dry Gulch Hanlon, moving with the sly confidence of a man who lived by ambush, Otis Scaleback Dunn, a brute with scars raked across his back like claw marks, and Malachi Holloway Graves, his lifeless stare colder than the steel of his revolver. The metallic jingle of Gideon's silver spur kells cut through the silence, each step punctuated by the glint of his prized spurs. Finally, looming behind them all, came Luther Bloodtrail Vance, the butcher of men, his very name whispered like a curse across the frontier. Abner didn't need words to understand their purpose. Each of those men carried the weight of blood on his shoulders, and now all of them had come hunting him. The air itself seemed thick with the promise of gunfire, the tang of powder lingering as if the battle had already begun. Thunder Hoof pawed at the earth, muscles twitching beneath his hide, as though he too sensed that survival might cost them everything. The silence stretched, taut as a drawn bowstring. Abner shifted his stance, the leather reins creaking in his grip, that small sound cracking through the stillness like thunder. He already knew this wasn't about cattle or fences or the land he stood on. No, there was something darker behind their eyes, something more dangerous than greed. From the haze, Virgil Rustjaw's voice rolled forward, low and rough, every word laced with threat. "You can't run, Colt. That horse was never yours." Abner held steady, eyes locked on the wall of killers before him. He had chosen to save Thunder Hoof when no one else would. That choice had lit a fire that now burned its way to this moment. The dust swirled around his boots, the town holding its breath, and then the truth cut him like a knife. They hadn't come for the herd. They hadn't come for the land. They'd come for him. The sun burned hot over the valley, turning the dirt fields into sheets of gold and bronze. Abner Colt Harkins leaned against the old fence line, his rough hands steadying a weathered post as he hammered in a new nail. Sweat trickled down his neck, soaking the collar of his faded shirt, but he worked with the patience of a man who had fought the land his whole life. Beside him, Thunder Hoof grazed lazily, his hide already shining brighter than when Abner first pulled him from death's edge. The steady rhythm of hammer-on wood mixed with the creak of leather, the smell of horse sweat, and the dry heat that wrapped around everything like a blanket. For a moment, life felt almost ordinary. The town sat a few miles down the road, its wooden rooftops barely visible over the ridge. Abner thought of writing and later to trade for grain and kerosene, but for now, he found comfort in the quiet. He muttered softly to Thunder Hoof, as if the horse were the only one worth confiding in. The animal flicked his ears, listening, and for the first time in years Abner felt like he had someone at his side who understood him. Saving the horse hadn't just been mercy, it had filled a hollow place inside him he hadn't realized was empty. By mid-afternoon, Abner decided to take Thunder Hoof into town anyway. The streets bustled with cowhands, ranch wives, and a few traveling salesmen. The clatter of wagon wheels echoed between the saloon and the mercantile, and the sour smell of whiskey floated through the air. He tied Thunder Hoof outside the general store and stepped inside, nodding politely at familiar faces. That's when he noticed them, three strangers at the counter, their hats low, their eyes following him without a word. They didn't look like drifters. They looked like men with a purpose. One of them, a lean figure with a scarred jaw, muttered something Abner couldn't quite hear. The storekeeper's smile tightened, his hands shaking slightly as he wrapped up Abner's goods. Abner didn't ask questions. He had learned long ago that in the West, silence often meant survival. Still, as he stepped back into the bright sun, the unease lingered. Thunder Hoof pawed at the ground as if sensing the same invisible tension. Later that evening, while leading the horse back along the dirt road to his ranch, Abner kept glancing over his shoulder. The horizon glowed red with the last light of day, and in the far distance, he swore he saw dust rising, riders, moving slow, deliberate, keeping their distance. He stopped for a long moment, scanning the ridgeline, but by the time he looked again, the dust was gone. Back at the ranch, the night fell quiet. The crickets sang, the stars spread wide above, and yet Abner couldn't shake the feeling. Something had shifted. The west always carried danger, but tonight the silence felt heavier. As Thunder Hoof settled in the corral, Abner leaned against the fence, chewing a blade of dry grass, and whispered to himself, "Something's coming. And it's not good." Morning came with a pale light spreading across the plains, washing the land in gray and gold. Abner Colt Harkins rose before the sun, as he always did, tightening his worn boots and walking out to check the cattle pens. The air was sharp, the smell of dust and leather clinging to everything. Thunder Hoof greeted him with a soft nicker, nudging his shoulder as if to remind him they shared the same burden. Abner smiled faintly, but his thoughts were restless. He couldn't forget the strangers in town, the way their eyes had lingered, the way the storekeeper's hands had trembled. Something wasn't right, and he knew it. By mid-morning, a rider appeared on the horizon. The figure moved with caution, stopping often to look behind. When he finally reached the ranch, Abner recognized him as Crowfoot Mercer, though the man's reputation had always preceded him. Crowfoot dismounted, his gaze steady and unreadable. "Word is, you've got something that doesn't belong to you," he said flatly. His eyes flicked toward Thunder Hoof, who stood tall and unflinching by the corral. Abner kept his hands loose by his sides, but his jaw clenched tight. "This horse was left to die," Abner replied. "If anyone claimed him, they abandoned him long before I found him." Crowfoot gave a cold smile. "Abandoned or not, he ain't yours. Men are coming, and they don't take kindly to thieves. You've got a choice, Colt, hand him over, or get caught in the storm." With that, he mounted again and rode off, his silhouette shrinking against the rising heat. Abner stood frozen, the words pressing heavy on his chest. The choice lay clear before him: surrender Thunder Hoof and save his own skin, or stand his ground and risk everything. Back in town, whispers traveled fast. Rustjaw Tate was seen at the saloon, his jaw crooked as he spat tobacco into the dust. Rufus Dry Gulch Hanlon leaned against the post outside, watching every face that passed. Even the sheriff had gone quiet, telling townsfolk to mind their business. A few neighbors urged Abner to let the horse go. "Ain't worth dying for," one man muttered. But another, older rancher, laid a hand on Abner's shoulder. "Sometimes, a man's gotta draw the line, or he'll be pushed till he's nothing." Abner weighed their words long into the evening. He thought of his younger years, when he had walked away from fights that weren't his, watching others pay the price. Thunder Hoof wasn't just a horse, he was a stand against the kind of men who thought they could take anything they pleased. Abner's decision settled in his bones, cold and certain. As night fell, he loaded his rifle and set it by the door. The coyotes howled in the distance, the wind rattled the shutters, and the air itself seemed to thicken with warning. Somewhere beyond the dark hills, riders were gathering. Abner looked once more at Thunder Hoof and whispered, "If it's a storm they want, then a storm they'll get." The following morning broke with a strange stillness. The sky carried an unnatural haze, as though the land itself knew violence was coming. Abner Colt Harkins saddled Thunder Hoof and rode the fence line, scanning the horizon. In the distance, faint trails of dust moved across the ridges. He counted at least 4 separate columns, riders too far to identify but close enough to stir the gut of any man with sense. Thunder Hoof snorted uneasily, ears pinned back. Abner tightened his grip on the reins, muttering under his breath, "They're closing in." When he returned to the ranch, the air was already heavy with whispers. A neighbor stopped by to warn him that Rustjaw Tate had been seen speaking with Malachi Holloway Graves in the saloon. Others claimed Otis Scaleback Dunn was riding with a fresh scar across his cheek, bragging that he'd soon be collecting a debt. Each rumor added to the growing weight pressing down on Abner. He tried to keep to his chores, repairing tools and feeding livestock, but every sound carried an edge of threat: the creak of a board, the distant crack of a whip, the echo of hoofbeats over dry earth. By noon, the tension spilled into town. Merchants spoke in hushed voices, mothers pulled their children inside, and men avoided eye contact as they hurried down the street. In the corner of the saloon, Rufus Dry Gulch Hanlon dealt cards with one hand while resting the other on his revolver, his cold smile daring anyone to question his presence. Across from him, Gideon Silver Spur Kells polished his gleaming spurs until they reflected the lamplight like blades. It wasn't just rumor anymore, the gang was here, assembling piece by piece, their shadows stretching long across every doorway. Abner tried to reason with the sheriff, but the man's hands trembled as he adjusted his badge. "Colt, you know what they're capable of," he said, his voice low. "I can't stop them. Best thing you can do is ride out tonight, leave the horse, and don't look back." Abner stared hard, disappointment simmering in his eyes. If the law wouldn't stand, then he'd have to stand alone. That night, Abner attempted to move Thunder Hoof under the cover of darkness, thinking perhaps he could lead the horse to safer ground. But as they reached the ridge, a sudden blaze lit the sky torches, dozens of them, flickering like angry stars against the black horizon. The riders weren't hiding anymore, they wanted him to see. The message was clear as the hoofbeats rolled like thunder through the valley: this fight was no longer avoidable. Abner patted Thunder Hoof's neck, the horse trembling beneath his touch. "So be it," he whispered. "If they're coming this close, then it's already begun." The dawn came red, painting the horizon like a wound. Abner Colt Harkins was already in the saddle, Thunder Hoof shifting beneath him with restless energy. He hadn't slept, the night had been filled with the echo of distant hoofbeats and the low howl of coyotes that seemed to circle closer than usual. As he guided the horse into town, the main street lay eerily quiet, shutters drawn, doors bolted. The people had vanished into silence, leaving only the weight of expectation. Trouble was waiting. At the far end of the street, Virgil Rustjaw Tate emerged, leaning against a post with his crooked jaw set tight. Flanking him came Rufus Dry Gulch Hanlon and Otis Scaleback Dunn, both armed and eager. Virgil spat into the dust, his rifle hanging lazily in his grip. "Morning, Colt," he said, voice grinding like gravel. "You've been keeping something that don't belong to you." Abner reined Thunder Hoof to a stop, his hand resting on the butt of his revolver. This horse was left to die. If a man abandons his beast, he forfeits his claim. The standoff thickened as Crowfoot Mercer stepped forward from the shadows, his voice calm but sharp as a blade. "You know it ain't about the horse, Harkins. It's about the man who thinks he can stand against us. That's what they want to settle." Abner's eyes narrowed, scanning their faces. He caught the flicker of uncertainty in Otis Dunn's stance, but Virgil pressed closer, ready to spark the fire. The first shot came not from Abner but from Rufus Hanlon. Dust exploded inches from Abner's boot as the bullet dug into the ground. Thunder Hoof reared, neighing with fury, and Abner drew his revolver in one swift motion. The crack of gunfire split the morning. Rufus stumbled back, his hat flying into the dirt as Abner's shot grazed his shoulder. For a heartbeat, silence followed, broken only by the echo of hooves striking wood as Thunder Hoof landed steady again. The fight didn't last long. Townsfolk peeked from windows as the pistoleros regrouped, anger in their eyes but no victory in their hands. Virgil barked orders, dragging Rufus away while Otis covered them with his shotgun. Abner held his aim steady until they vanished into the haze of dust, their retreat laced with threats. He had won the moment, but at a cost. The bullet hole in the ground felt like a grave dug in advance. As the echoes died, Abner realized what the townsfolk already knew: this wasn't finished. The gang would be back, and they would not come for a warning shot next time. He holstered his revolver, his jaw set firm. "They'll be coming again," he muttered to Thunder Hoof. And deep inside, he knew the truth: this wouldn't end until every gun was drawn, and one side was left standing. The wind carried the smell of smoke across the valley that evening, sharp and bitter like a warning. Abner Colt Harkins stood on his porch, rifle leaning against the rail, Thunder Hoof grazing in the corral nearby. His mind replayed the gunfight again and again, the shot that grazed Rufus Dry Gulch Hanlon, the way the others had pulled back with rage in their eyes. He knew it wasn't just a skirmish. It was a message, and more were coming. But what gnawed at him most was the way Crowfoot Mercer had spoken: "It ain't about the horse. It's about the man." Later that night, a knock rattled the door. Abner opened it to find an old trapper, his beard matted, eyes darting nervously. The man introduced himself only as a messenger, sent by someone who had once ridden with the same pistoleros now hunting Abner. "They don't care about Thunder Hoof," the trapper whispered. "That horse was just the excuse. You're the prize, Colt. You don't remember it, but years back, you crossed Luther Blood Trail Vance without knowing it. Took water from his land during a drought, saved your cattle. He swore then he'd even the score someday." The truth cut deep. Abner remembered the summer the sky refused to rain, when his herd was dying and he had led them to a stream beyond his boundary. He thought the land had been abandoned, forgotten. He never imagined it belonged to Blood Trail. Now, years later, the vengeance had ripened, and Thunder Hoof was just the spark to light the fire. As the trapper slipped back into the night, Abner paced the floor, the boards creaking beneath his boots. Everything made sense: the relentless stares, the organized way the men had moved, the sheer numbers gathering against him. This wasn't just a gang's whim. It was blood debt. His chest tightened as he realized the weight of it. They wouldn't stop with him, they would burn the ranch, trample his cattle, and slaughter Thunder Hoof just to make the lesson crueler. By midnight, Abner found himself staring into the horse's dark eyes. Thunder Hoof nickered softly, brushing his muzzle against Abner's shoulder. The bond between them was more than chance, it was a lifeline, a symbol that some things were still worth standing for. "I dragged you back from death," Abner muttered, his voice low. "And now it looks like we'll face it together." He loaded his rifle, packed extra cartridges, and set his jaw like iron. There was no more hiding, no more hoping the storm would pass. The truth had come out, and it could not be undone. When the riders came again, and he knew they would, Abner would be waiting. The following day rose with a cruel brightness, the sun spilling over the ridges as if mocking the darkness gathering in Abner's life. Abner Colt Harkins saddled Thunder Hoof, his hands steady though his heart thudded like a war drum. The valley stretched out wide and empty, but he could feel eyes on him, watching from the rocks, the gullies, the tree lines. Every breath of wind seemed to carry the whisper of boots on gravel or the metallic rattle of spurs. He knew the trap was closing, and yet he rode straight into it. By noon, he reached the canyon trail where the shadows were deep and the walls rose high on either side. That's where they struck. Gunfire cracked, bullets sparking off stone, and Thunder Hoof reared with a scream. Abner clung to the saddle, pulling his rifle free, returning fire as his horse carried him through the gauntlet. The canyon echoed like a thunderclap with every shot. A searing pain ripped across his arm as a bullet grazed him, hot blood soaking his sleeve. He had been marked, injured, outnumbered, and cornered. The pistoleros closed in fast. Virgil Rustjaw Tate rode hard from the left, his rifle barking with each pull of the trigger. From the ridge above, Malachi Holloweye Graves fired with precision, his hollow stare locked on Abner. Dust choked the air, and the sound of hoofs thundered louder than Abner's own heartbeat. For the first time in years, fear crawled into his bones. He had no advantage left, no higher ground, no allies. It seemed the canyon itself had betrayed him, sealing him in. Thunder Hoof pushed forward with desperate strength, muscles straining, nostrils flaring with fire. Abner leaned low, whispering into the horse's ear, "Steady, boy, steady." They burst through a break in the gunfire, carving a path into the open plains. But even in escape, Abner could feel the net tightening. Eli Crowfoot Mercer and Otis Scaleback Dunn were already waiting ahead, rifles glinting in the harsh sunlight. The world had become a circle of guns, and he was at its center. Exhaustion pressed in, the kind that dragged a man toward surrender. Abner's arm burned, his chest heaved, and Thunder Hoof staggered under the weight of too much running, too much fighting. For one flickering moment, hopelessness nearly broke him. He thought of laying down the rifle, of ending it quick rather than dragging it out. But then he remembered the stream years ago, the choice to save his cattle even when the odds had been impossible. He remembered the look in Thunder Hoof's eyes the night he saved the horse from death. Some things weren't meant to be given up. With blood dripping from his sleeve and dust burning in his lungs, Abner made his choice. He wheeled Thunder Hoof sharply, driving the horse toward the ridgeline. If he could lure them into the canyon's choke point, he might have one desperate chance. It wasn't a plan born of hope, it was born of necessity. As he tightened the reins and spurred Thunder Hoof forward, a single thought carried him through the fire: better to die standing than live on my knees. The canyon walls rose like jagged teeth as Abner Colt Harkins rode hard, Thunder Hoof pounding the earth with every desperate stride. Dust and gun smoke mixed in the air, the echoes of hooves chasing him like the roll of drums before a hanging. The pistoleros were closing fast, Virgil Rustjaw Tate, Eli Crowfoot Mercer, and Otis Scaleback Dunn fanning out to trap him, while the others pushed from behind. Abner could feel the noose tightening, every breath tasting of blood and grit. The ridge narrowed ahead, and he knew this was it, no more running. He pulled Thunder Hoof to a sharp stop at the canyon's choke point, a narrow stretch where the cliffs pressed so close even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Raising his rifle, Abner let the silence hang. When the riders emerged from the haze, their silhouettes sharp against the fading light, it felt as though the west itself had drawn a line in the dust. Luther Blood Trail Vance came forward at last, his presence heavier than the guns at his side. His eyes were cold iron, unblinking as they fixed on Abner. "You stole from me years ago," Blood Trail growled. "And then you took that horse. Now you'll pay in full." Abner's voice carried steady despite the pain in his arm. "I took nothing but water to keep my herd alive. If you'd call that theft, then you've already forgotten what it means to be a man of the land. As for this horse, he was left to die. I gave him a second chance." His words cut through the air like steel, but the gang only sneered. Virgil spat, and Otis chambered around with a deliberate click. The canyon bristled with menace, every hand itching for the draw. But before the trigger could be pulled, a voice rang out from the ridge above. Gideon Silver Spur Kells rode forward, his spurs catching the dim light like fire. "Enough," he barked, his eyes shifting not to Abner, but to Blood Trail. "You swore vengeance, Luther, but you never told us it was over a stream. A man taking water for dying cattle ain't theft, it's survival. You've been dragging us into a war for your pride, not justice." The gang shifted uneasily, their loyalty cracking in the silence that followed. Malachi Holloway Graves hissed, his revolver twitching, but even he paused at Gideon's defiance. For the first time, doubt clouded the air thicker than gun smoke. Abner lowered his rifle just a fraction, sensing the fracture. Blood Trail's jaw tightened, rage flaring in his eyes as he realized control was slipping. The canyon felt like a powder keg, sparks dancing between every drawn weapon. Abner took a slow breath, his voice firm. "You came for me, but the truth's plain. This isn't about a horse, or even about me. It's about one man's pride choking out the whole valley. Question is, are you all willing to die for it?" The silence that followed was heavier than any gunshot. All eyes turned to Luther Blood Trail Vance, and in that moment, the fate of every man present hung on his next word. The canyon trembled with silence, every man caught between fear and fury. Luther Blood Trail. Vance sat tall in his saddle, his hand twitching over the grip of his revolver. For years, his name had commanded obedience, but now doubt bled through his ranks. Gideon Silver Spur Kells kept his horse steady, his voice hard as steel. "We came here as a gang, Luther, but you've turned us into pawns of your grudge. This man's fight ain't our fight." The gang shifted uneasily, eyes darting between their leader and Abner. The West had little mercy for divided men, and everyone knew it. Virgil Rustjaw Tate snarled, spitting into the dust. "He's one man against all of us. We can finish this quick." But even as he spoke, hesitation cracked his bravado. Abner Colt Harkins didn't flinch. He sat firm in the saddle, Thunder Hoof steady beneath him, his rifle leveled not in desperation but in resolve. "If you pull iron, then understand one thing," Abner said, voice carrying through the canyon. "I'll fight till my last breath. But this horse, he'll outlive every one of you that falls." The standoff cracked when Otis Scaleback Dunn lowered his shotgun, shaking his head. "I didn't sign on to kill a man over water," he muttered. One by one, the others faltered. Rufus Hanlon's hand slipped from his revolver, Malachi Graves' hollow stare flickered with uncertainty. The balance shifted, and Blood Trail felt it. His fury boiled over, and with a roar, he drew first. The canyon exploded in gunfire. Blood Trail's shot tore through Abner's coat, grazing his side, but Abner fired back true. The echo thundered through stone walls as Blood Trail reeled in the saddle, his revolver slipping from his grasp. Thunder Hoof surged forward, Abner's second shot striking the dirt near Blood Trail's boots, forcing him down hard into the dust. The once feared outlaw lay broken, his legend shattered beneath the weight of truth and defiance. The gang froze, guns half raised, but none dared fire again. Gideon reined his horse close, his spurs jingling like a gavel striking judgment. "It's finished," he declared. "Anyone still thirsting for blood can ride with him into the grave. Or you can ride out of here free men." The choice hung in the air, and slowly, weapons lowered. One by one, the pistoleros turned away, their loyalty to Blood Trail dissolving like smoke in the wind. Abner sat high, blood seeping through his side, his breath ragged but steady. Thunder Hoof snorted, stamping the ground as if claiming victory alongside him. The canyon, once thick with the stench of death, now carried something else: respect, raw and grudging, but real. For the first time, Abner realized this fight had never just been about survival. It was about standing when no one else would. And now, the valley would remember it. Weeks passed, and the valley slowly began to breathe again. The fear that had hung over the land like a storm cloud was gone, carried off with the fall of Luther Blood Trail Vance. The townsfolk returned to their routines, children ran through the dusty streets once more, and the saloon doors swung open without the weight of dread behind them. For Abner Colt Harkins, the scars of the fight lingered, his arms still stiff, his side tender where the bullet had grazed him, but he carried them like badges of survival. More than anything, he carried the knowledge that he had not broken when it mattered most. Thunder Hoof stood taller now, his coat gleaming, his spirit untamed but loyal. The horse had become more than a companion, he was a reminder of why Abner had fought at all. Men from neighboring ranches often rode up just to see the animal that had sparked a war. Some shook their heads in disbelief, others nodded in quiet respect. Abner would smile faintly, patting Thunder Hoof's neck. "He's no man's prize," he'd say. "He's his own." And in those words, the townsfolk heard the echo of the stand Abner had taken. One evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, Gideon's silver spur kells returned. He rode alone, his spurs glinting in the fading light. For a long while, the two men sat on the porch of Abner's ranch in silence, the weight of their choices unspoken between them. At last, Gideon said, "Blood Trail's name will fade, but what you did here won't. You reminded men that pride can't rule the West forever." Abner didn't answer right away. He simply looked out at the fields, the fences, and Thunder Hoof grazing peacefully. Some truths didn't need words. Life didn't turn perfect after that day, nothing in the West ever did. There were still disputes over land, still drifters looking for trouble, still nights when the wind carried the faint echo of danger. But there was also something new, something sturdier than fear: respect. Abner had faced the worst of men and refused to bow. That kind of act reshaped the soil itself, leaving roots of defiance that others would lean on. Months later, on the anniversary of the standoff, the town gathered at the canyon where it had all ended. They placed a simple marker in the dust, not for Blood Trail, but for the moment itself. A line of words carved into the wood read, "Here, a man stood his ground." Abner watched from the ridge, Thunder Hoof at his side, the crowd below united in memory of what had nearly torn them apart. As twilight settled and lanterns flickered against the dark, Abner spoke the words he had carried since the guns fell silent. Sometimes, in the West, the fastest draw wasn't the one that saved lives, it was the hand that reached out first. With that, he turned his horse toward the horizon, the echo of hoofbeats fading into the endless stretch of land, carrying both scars and peace into the quiet night.